Welcome to Chapter 3 for Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. You have in your teams a worksheet that looks like this. Part 1 is your comprehension check. I would encourage you to either download this file and type your answers right within here, or to type them into a Word document. Please make sure that you are giving me ACE answers. You're restating, answering, citing, and explaining. When you can, make sure you're giving me at least 2 text details. So these are going to be long answers. I'm looking to see 3 to 5, even more, 5 to 8 sentences for some of these questions. Let's take a look at what we'll be paying attention to for this chapter. Question 1, what does Cassie realize about Jeremy and the bus? Why do you think this is so? 2, how do the children gain revenge against the bus and its passengers? 3, what do the children hear Mr. Avery say to Mama? What conclusion do the children come to about what they hear? 4, what does Cassie see after she sneaks out of the house? And 5, draw a conclusion about the Nightmen. Who do you think they are? Do you think they are after the children? Why or why not? Part 2 is personification practice. We're going to take notes in class on personification, and then there's more practice within here. As I read, I'm probably going to stop and discuss some of the examples of personification because the book is full of it. All right, so let's turn to chapter 3, which starts on page 42. By the end of October, the rain had come, falling heavily upon the 6-inch layer of dust which had had its own way for more than 2 months. At first, the rain had merely splotched the dust, which seemed to be rejoicing in its own resiliency and laughing at the heavy drops thudding against it. But eventually, the dust was forced to surrender to the mastery of the rain, and it churned into a fine red mud that oozed between our toes and slopped against our ankles as we marched miserably to and from school. So I have to pause because this paragraph is full of personification. So giving human qualities to something that is not human. In this case, it's the dust. Remember in the previous chapters, the dusty road is a problem. Remember how little man didn't want to get his shoes all dusty and dirty? But now it's starting to rain. We have in that second one, so initially the rain starts to hit the dust and the dust rejoices. That's not a quality of dust. That's a human quality to rejoice in something. It's rejoicing because it's so resilient. It bounces back. It's not getting dirty and muddy yet. Well, it's dirty. It's not getting muddy and wet yet because it's been so dry. And it laughs at the heavy drops. Personification, laughing. And eventually, though, it's forced to surrender. It gives in. Dust can't really give in, it just happens. But that's that personification. It gives in to the rain, and then we get this mud. All right, let's keep reading. To shield us from the rain, Mama issued us dried calfskins, which we flung over our heads and shoulders like stick cloaks. We were not very fond of the skins, for once they were wet, they emitted a musty odor, which seeped into our clothing and clung to our skins. We preferred to do without them. Unfortunately, Mama cared very little about what we preferred. Since we usually left school after Mama, we solved this problem by dutifully cloaking ourselves with the skins before leaving home. As soon as we were beyond Big Ma's eagle eyes, we threw off the cloaks and depended upon the overhanging limbs of the forest trees to keep us dry. Once at school, we donned the cloaks again and marched into our respective classrooms, properly attired. If we had been faced only with the prospect of the rain soaking through our clothing each morning and evening, we could have easily endured the journey between home and school. But as it was, we also had to worry about the Jefferson Davis school bus zooming from behind and splashing us with the murky waters of the road. Knowing that the bus driver liked to entertain his passengers by sending us slipping along the road to the almost inaccessible forest banks washed to a smooth baldness by the constant rains. We continuously looked over our shoulders when we were between the 2 crossroads so that we could reach the bank before the bus was upon us. But sometimes the rain pounded so heavily that it was all we could do to stay upright, and we did not look back as often nor listen as carefully as we should. We consequently found ourselves comical objects to cruel eyes that gave no thought to our misery. No one was more angered by this humiliation than Little Man. Although he had asked Mama after the first day of school why Jefferson Davis had 2 buses and Great Faith had none, he had never been totally satisfied by her answer. She had explained to him, as she had explained to Christopher John the year before and to me 2 years before that the county did not provide buses for its Black students. In fact, she said the county provided very little, and much of the money which supported the Black schools came from the Black churches. Great Faith Church just could not afford a bus, so therefore we had to walk. This information cut deeply into Little Man's brain, and each day when he found his clean clothes splashed red by the school bus, he became more and more embittered until finally one day he stomped angrily into the kitchen and exploded. "They done it again, Big Ma. Just look at my clothes." Big Ma clucked her tongue as she surveyed us. "Well, go on and get out of them, honey, and wash them out. All of y'all get out of them clothes and dry yourselves," she said, turning back to the huge iron-bellied stove to stir her stew. "But Big Ma, it ain't fair," wailed Little Man. "It just ain't fair." Stacy and Christopher John left to change into their work clothes, but Little Man sat on the side bench looking totally dejected as he gazed at his pale blue pants crusted with mud from the knees down. Although each night Big Ma prepared a pot of hot, soapy water for him to wash out his clothing, each day he arrived home looking as if his pants had not been washed in more than a month. Big Ma was not one for coddling any of us, but now she turned from the stove and, wiping her hands on her long white apron, sat down on the bench and put her arm around Little Man. "Now, look here, baby. It ain't the end of the world. Lord, child, don't you know one day the sun'll shine again and you won't get muddy no more?" "But Big Ma," Little Man protested, "if that old bus driver would slow down, I wouldn't get muddy." Then he frowned deeply and added, "Or if we had a bus like theirs." "Well, he don't and you don't," Big Ma said, getting up. "So ain't no use fretting about it. One day you'll have plenty of clothes and maybe even a car of your own to ride around in. So don't you pay no mind to them ignorant white folks. You just keep on studying and get yourself a good education and you'll be all right. Now, go on and wash out your clothes and hang them by the fire so as I can iron them before I go to bed." Turning, she spied me. "Cassie, what you want, girl? Go change into your pants and hurry on back here so as you can help me get this supper on the table time your mama get home." That night, when I was snug in the deep feathery bed beside Big Ma, the tat-tat of the rain against the tin roof changed to a deafening roar that sounded as if thousands of giant rocks were being hurled against the earth. So that's not personification of the rain, but we hear tat-tat and roar. Oh, roar is not necessarily human quality, right? It's more a sound. Do we remember what that's called when we have a sound word? Something that imitates? Tat, tat. Going to be onomatopoeia. We'll get to that one later this year. We haven't taken our notes yet. By morning, the heavy rain had become a drizzle, but the earth was badly sodden from the night's downpour. High rivers of muddy water flowed in the deep gullies, and wide lakes shimmered on the road. As we set out for school, the whiteness of the sun attempted to penetrate the storm clouds, but by the time we had turned north toward the second crossing, it had been given up, slinking meekly behind the blackening clouds. Soon the thunder rolled across the sky and the rain fell like hail upon our bent heads. "Aw, shoot. I sure am getting tired of this mess," complained TJ. But no one else said a word. We were listening for the bus. Although we had left home earlier than usual to cover the northern road before the bus came, we were not overly confident that we would miss it, for we had tried this strategy before. Sometimes it worked, most times it didn't. It was as if the bus were a living thing, plaguing and defeating us at every turn. We could not outwit it. So now we have the personification of the bus, as though that vehicle can actually think and it knows how to outwit them and find them. We plodded again, feeling the cold mud against our feet, walking faster and faster to reach the crossroads. Then Christopher John stopped. "Hey, y'all, I think I hear it," he warned. We looked around, but saw nothing. "Ain't nothing yet," I said. We walked on. "Wait a minute," said Christopher John, stopping a second time. "There it is again." We turned, but still there was nothing. "Why don't you clean out your ears?" TJ exclaimed. "Wait," said Stacy. "I think I hear it too." We hastened up the road to where the gully was narrower and we could easily swing up the bank into the forest. Soon the purr of the motor, so not personification, purr, more onomatopoeia. Soon the purr of the motor came closer and Mr. Granger's sleek silver Packard eased into view. It was a grand car with chrome shining even in the rain, and the only one like it in the county. So it was said. So remember that picture I showed you in class about 2 weeks ago? The man selling his car because of the Great Depression, and he was selling a Packard. That same, what did it say it was white? Just say it's grand. Same type of car, very fancy car, only one in the county. We groaned. "Just old Harlan," said TJ flippantly, as the expensive car rounded a curve and disappeared. Then he and Claude started down the bank. Stacy stopped them. "Long as we're already up here, why don't we wait a while?" he suggested. "The bus ought to be here soon, and it'll be harder to get up on the bank farther down the road." "Aw, man, that bus ain't coming for a while yet," said TJ. "We left early this morning, remember?" Stacy looked to the south, thinking. Little man, Christopher John, and I waited for the decision. "Come on, man," TJ persuaded. "Why stay up here waiting for that devilish bus when we could be at school out of this mess?" Well, TJ and Claude jumped from the bank. Then Stacy, frowning as if he were doing this against his better judgment, jumped down too. Little man, Christopher John, and I followed. 5 minutes later, we were skidding like frightened puppies toward the bank again as the bus accelerated, sped up, and barreled down the narrow, rain-soaked road. But there was no place to which we could run, for Stacy had been right. Here, the gullies were too wide, filled almost to overflowing, and there were no briars or bushes by which we could swing up onto the bank. Finally, when the bus was less than 50 feet behind us, it veered dangerously close to the right edge of the road, where we were running, forcing us to attempt the jump to the bank. But all of us fell short and landed in the slime of the gully. Little man, chest deep in water, scooped up a handful of mud, and in an uncontrollable rage, scrambled up to the road and ran after the retreating bus. As moronic rolls of laughter and cries of "Nigger, nigger, mud eater" wafted from the open windows. Little man threw his mud ball, missing the wheels by several feet. Then, totally dismayed by what had happened, he buried his face in his hands and cried. He was chest deep in water. TJ climbed from the gully, grinning at little man. But Stacy, his face burning red beneath his dark skin, glared fiercely at TJ. That he fell back. "Just one word out of you, TJ," he said tightly. "Just one word." He's threatening him because he thinks it's funny. He's gonna pick on him some more when he's already down. Christopher John and I looked at each other. We had never seen Stacy look like this, and neither had TJ. "Hey man, I ain't said nothing. I'm just as burnt as you are." Stacy glowered at TJ a moment longer, then walked swiftly to little man and put his long arm around his shoulder, saying softly, "Come on, man. It ain't gonna happen no more. At least not for a long while. I promise you that." Again, Christopher John and I looked questioningly at each other, wondering how Stacy could make such a rash promise. Then shrugging, we hurried after him. When Jeremy Sims spied us from his high perch on the forest path, he ran hastily down and joined us. So remember that Jeremy Sims was that white boy that they met on the first day of school. "Hey," he said, his face lighting into a friendly grin, but no one spoke to him. The smile faded, and noticing our mud-covered clothing, he asked, "Hey, Stacy, what happened?" Stacy turned, stared into his blue eyes, and said coldly, "Why don't you leave us alone? How come you always hanging around us anyway? Are any other white kids walking with them?" "No, they're all on the bus laughing at them." Jeremy grew even more pale. "'Cause I just likes y'all," he stammered. Then he whispered, "Was it the bus again?" No one answered him, and he said no more. When we reached the crossroad, he looked hopefully at us if we might relent and say goodbye. But we did not relent. And as I glanced back at him standing alone in the middle of the crossing, he looked as if the world itself was slung around his neck. It was only then that I realized that Jeremy never rode the bus, no matter how bad the weather. So there is the realization and your text evidence for your first question. What did Cassie just realize? This white boy never rides the bus, even when it's pouring rain out. As we crossed the school lawn, Stacy beckoned Christopher John, little man, and me aside. "Look," he whispered, "meet me at the tool shed right at noon." "Why?" we asked. He eyed us conspiratorially, like he's got a plan. "I'll show y'all how we're gonna stop that bus from splashing us." "How?" asked little man, eager for revenge. "Don't have time to explain now. Just meet me and be on time. It's gonna take us all lunch hour." "You mean we ain't gonna eat no lunch?" Christopher John cried in dismay. "You can miss lunch for one day," said Stacy, moving away. But Christopher John looked sourly after him, as if he greatly questioned the wisdom of a plan so drastic that it could exclude lunch. "You gonna tell TJ and Claude?" I asked. Stacy shook his head. "TJ's my best friend, but he's got no stomach for this kind of thing. He talks too much, and we couldn't include Claude without TJ." "Good," said little man. At noon, we met as planned and ducked into the unlocked tool shed where all the church and school garden tools were kept. Stacy studied the tools available while the rest of us watched. Then, grabbing the only shovels, he handed one to me, holding on to the other himself, and directed little man and Christopher John to each take 2 buckets. Stealthily emerging from the tool shed into the drizzle, we eased along the forest edge behind the class buildings to avoid being seen. Once on the road, Stacy began to run. "Come on, hurry," he ordered. "We ain't got much time." "Where are we going?" asked Christopher John, still not quite adjusted to the prospect of missing lunch. "Up to where that bus forced us off the road. Be careful now," he said to Christopher John, already puffing to keep up. When we reached the place where we had fallen into the gully, Stacy halted. "All right," he said, "start digging." Without another word, he put his bare foot upon the top edge of the shovel and sank it deep into the soft road. Come on," he ordered, glancing up at Christopher John, little man, and me, who were wondering whether he had finally gone mad. "Cassie, you start digging over there on that side of the road, right across from me. That's right. Don't get too near the edge. It's got to look like it's been washed out. Christopher John, you and little man start scooping out mud from the middle of the road. Quick now," he said, still digging as we began to carry out his commands. "We only got about 30 minutes so as we can get back to school on time." We asked no more questions. While Stacy and I shoveled ragged holes almost a yard wide and a foot deep toward each other, dumping the excess mud into the water-filled gullies, Little Man and Christopher John scooped buckets full of the red earth from the road center. And for once in his life, Little Man was happily oblivious to the mud spattering upon him. When Stacy's and my holes merged into one big hole with Little Man's and Christopher John's, Stacy and I threw down our shovels and grabbed the extra buckets. Then the four of us ran back and forth to the gullies, hastily filling the buckets with the murky water and dumping it into the hole. So remember how deep that water was, that the 6-year-old boy is up to his chest. So it's a pretty deep hole. And they've dug it down at least a foot in the road, and they're filling it up in water so it looks like that little part just washed out, that when coming upon it, you wouldn't necessarily think it's a whole foot down. What's that going to do to a vehicle that goes into a hole a foot deep? Now, understanding Stacy's plan, we worked wordlessly until the water lay at the same level as the road. Then Stacy waded into the gully water and pulled himself up onto the forest bank. Finding 3 rocks, he stacked them to identify the spot. It might look different this afternoon, he explained, jumping down again. Christopher John looked up at the sky. Looks like it's going to rain real hard some more. Let's hope so, said Stacy. The more rain, the better. That'll make it seem more likely that the road could have been washed away like that. It'll also keep cars and wagons away. He looked around, surveying the road. And let's hope don't nothing come along for that bus. Let's go. Quickly, we gathered our buckets and shovels and hurried back to school. After returning the tools to the tool shed, we stopped at the well to wash the mud from our arms and feet. Then rushed into our classes, excuse me, hoping that the mud caked on our clothes would go unnoticed. As I slipped into my seat, Miss Crocker looked at me oddly and shook her head, but when she did the same thing as Mary Lou and Alma sat down. I decided that my mud was no more noticeable than anyone else's. Sorry, I'm going to interrupt our video for a second just so I can get the tickle out of my throat. All right. Soon after I had settled down to the boredom of Miss Crocker, the rain began to pound again, hammering with great intensity upon the tin roof. After school, it was still raining as the boys and I, avoiding TJ and Claude, rushed along the slippery road, recklessly bypassing more cautious students. You think we'll get there in time to see, Stacy? I asked. We should. They stay in school 15 minutes longer than we do, and it always takes them a few minutes to load up. When we reached the crossing, we glanced toward Jefferson Davis. The buses were there, but the students had not been dismissed. We hastened on. Expecting to see the yard-wide ditch we had dug at noon, we were not prepared for the 12-foot lake which glimmered up at us. Holy smokes, what happened? I exclaimed. The rain, said Stacy. Quick, up on the bank. Eagerly, we settled onto the muddy forest floor and waited. Hey, Stacy, I said, won't that big a puddle make the old driver cautious? Stacy frowned, then said uncertainly, I don't know. Hope not. There's big puddles down the road that ain't deep, just water heavy. If I was to be walking out there when the bus comes, that old bus driver would be sure to speed up so as he could splash me, I suggested. Or maybe, Little Man volunteered, ready to do anything for his revenge. Stacy thought a moment, but decided against it. Nah, it's better none of us be on the road when it happens. It might give him ideas. Stacy, what if they find out we done it? Asked Christopher John nervously. Don't worry, they won't, assured Stacy. Hey, I think it's coming, whispered Little Man. We flattened ourselves completely and peered through the low bushes. The bus rattled up the road, though not as quickly as we'd hoped. It rolled cautiously through a wide puddle some 20 feet ahead. Then, seeming to grow bolder as it approached our man-made lake, it speeded up, spraying the water in high sheets of backward waterfalls into the forest. We could hear the students squealing with delight, but instead of the graceful glide through the puddle that its occupants were expecting, the bus emitted a tremendous crack and careened drunkenly into our trap. For a moment, it swayed and we held our breath, afraid that it would topple over. Then it sputtered a last murmuring protest and died. Its left front wheel in our ditch, its right wheel in the gully, like a lopsided billy goat on its knees. So this paragraph right here, you're going to end up coming back to for your personification practice. I'll just point out that there's a lot there. The very last sentence, though, we covered similes last week. So I just want to point out that they're comparing the bus, the way it's fallen over in the gully, to a lopsided billy goat. That's a simile, that's not personification, where we use that word like and make a comparison. We covered our mouths and shook with silent laughter. As the dismayed driver opened the rear emergency exit, the rain poured down upon him in sharp needle darts. He stood in the doorway, looking down with disbelief at his sunken charge. Then, holding on to the bus, he poked one foot into the water until it was on solid ground before gingerly stepping down. He looked under the bus. He looked at the steaming hood. He looked at the water. Then he scratched his head and cursed. "How bad is it, Mr. Grimes?" a large freckle-faced boy asked, pushing up one of the cracked windows and sticking out his head. "Can we push it out and fix it?" "Push it out? Fix it?" the bus driver echoed angrily. "I got me a broken axle here and a waterlogged engine, no doubt, and no telling what all else, and you talking about fixing it. Y'all come on, get out of there. Y'all gonna have to walk home." "Mr. Grimes," a girl ventured, stepping hesitantly from the rear of the bus, "you gonna be able to pick us up in the morning?" The bus driver stared at her in disbelief. "Girl, all y'all gonna be walking for at least 2 weeks by the time we get this thing hauled out of here and up to Strawberry to get fixed. Now y'all get on home." He kicked a back tire and added, "And get y'all's daddies to come on up here and give me a hand with this thing." The students turned dismally from the bus. They didn't know how wide the hole actually was. Some of them took a wild guess and tried to jump it, but most of them miscalculated and fell in, to our everlasting delight. Others attempted to hop over the gullies to the forest to bypass the hole. However, we knew from much experience that they would not make it. By the time most of the students managed to get to the other side of the ditch, their clothes were dripping with the weight of the muddy water. No longer laughing, they moved spiritlessly toward their homes, while a disgruntled Mr. Grimes leaned moodily against the raised rear end of the bus. Oh, how sweet was well-maneuvered revenge. With that thought in my mind, we quietly eased away and picked our way through the dense forest toward home. And since there is a break right here, we're going to pause with chapter 3 and we'll pick up with another lesson later.